This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Hello and welcome to News Extra. My name is Stephen Imediegu. News Extra focuses this week on the effects of climate change on weather patterns. Now, starting in March of this year, it was noted that temperatures across places like Nigeria, and we'll keep this at home, temperatures in Nigeria soared, with households across the nation breaking out in sweat and wondering what exactly they could do to manage the weather. Now, those who have the science to tell us what happened say that this is all part of the El Nino events which have been observed at various points throughout man's history, starting as early as the 1891s and running even up until this year. The El Nino event causes changes in weather patterns, as well as some of the effects that we have seen more recently with heat waves recorded in the month of March. But to talk to us about what climate change is really doing to our weather patterns, especially in Nigeria, we're turning to climate change activist, or educator as he likes to be called, Ifeanyi. I beg your pardon, we're turning to Ifeanyi Ohanieri on the conversation this morning. Mr. Ohanieri, welcome to the News Extra.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be on the call today.
Awesome. Mr. Ohanieri, what can you tell us in terms of what climate change does to weather patterns in Nigeria? And I guess we can look at the rest of the world.
Okay. So climate change basically has to do with the disruption to the long-term weather patterns on Earth. And when you talk about weather, it's just basically the short-term changes in the environment when it comes to like rainfall, when it comes to precipitation and all of that. But climate change is more long-term, and when you see those changes, it basically affects a whole lot of things. And in terms of what are the key drivers for climate change, it's largely due to human activities. So activities such as burning fossil fuels, deforestation, also industrial processes that have high emission of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. These are some of the factors, or these are some of the causative agents that lead to the change in the climate. And when you talk about the change in climate and what it means, it's basically disrupting what you know as the normal, as the usual. I talked about weather earlier on, and when you see drastic changes to what you're expecting over a long period of time, that's when you start talking about climate change. And in Nigeria particularly, we have been on the receiving end of this change in climate, and it's affected our way of life, it's affected our economy, it's affected the stability of our ecosystems. So you look at the high rainfall patterns that we observe from time to time that leads to flooding. We also look at the lack of rainfall at the same time, which can sound funny, but then it just shows you how drastic climate change can be. Lack of rainfall, which also leads to drought. So these are just some of the effects that we have. And you mentioned the heat waves. The heat waves basically is one of the effects as well of climate change, and generally it's not something that is desirable, but we find ourselves in such situations, and this is largely due to human activities. Thank you.
So this presents a very a bit of a heavy burden to bear when you talk about human activities being responsible for climate change, especially because you've brought in industrial activities as well. Now, in Africa, there is a need to industrialize. It's almost the refrain that we sing every other time, but we find ourselves unable to do that without being looked at by the rest of the world as contributing heavily to emissions that are destroying the ozone layer and worsening climate change. But I'm curious as to whether there is a way to reverse the effects of climate change that we are seeing at the moment.
Yes, there is a way. So when you are in a hole, you basically have to stop digging. That's the first thing to do. And as I mentioned, there are human activities that lead to climate change, just as the use of fossil fuels. And the reason for that is because it goes into the atmosphere, and basically these gases have like a shield, a blanketing effect, and that leads to the heat that comes from the sun being trapped. So, what do you do? Basically, reduce the greenhouse gases that are emitted. And one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases is in the process of generating power, because like that's how we do it, like using fossil fuels. So if we can switch to cleaner sources, that would be a very big move, a very big statement in terms of reducing the impacts of climate change. Agriculture too is another area that also is a big emitter of climate change, of greenhouse gases. So if we could switch to sustainable sources of fertilizer, that could also help us. And some of our lifestyle activities would also need to change if we want to drastically reduce climate change. So when I talk about lifestyle changes, you see people who use energy that they just turn on appliances that they are not using. That simply means that we would need more energy to be produced to offset or to supply those loads. So if you have equipment in your house that are not being needed, you could simply turn them off. Those little changes, they have like a very big impact, because if you have a million people turning off a light bulb, it simply means that the power plant may not need to come on stream, and just those little changes like have a very big impact. As well, some of the decisions we can take could be as simple as deciding to use cleaner sources, cleaner means of transportation. Like if you don't have to drive, can you rather cycle if it's a closed location you're going to? If you Do you really need to drive your car alone? Why not carpool and have more people join you, such that we have less cars on the road, and that means that there are less sources of emissions. So these are some simple things that we can do that have a significant effect on the climate.
So, I just want to clarify this. It doesn't look as though we can take any steps that will reverse it immediately. It sounds as though we can instead slow down what's happening. But is there a possibility of actually stopping what we are witnessing as far as climate change is concerned?
To be honest with you, it's going to be very difficult to stop it, because it's a very complex systems. There are lots of things that come into play when you talk about climate science, and it's not just as simple as pulling out greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. I don't know, you may have heard of what happened in the UAE, Dubai recently, where there are cases of cloud seeding, and this is just like the country trying to geoengineer their environment by creating artificial clouds that would lead to rainfall, just trying to solve the problem within their own vicinity, and that led to like significant rainfall over what they anticipated, and led to disastrous flooding. So it just shows that it's not a it's not very simple to just manipulate some variables and expect that it's going to yield certain outcomes. But what we can do is to ensure that we don't cross tipping points. Now, these tipping points are such that if they are crossed, then it simply means that the impact of climate change will be more significant. We talk about sea level rise, and we know, of course, those who live in Lagos know of the seasonal floodings that happen with the sea encroaching and all of that. When you have sea level rise, the sea rising by 1 meter, 2 meters. It simply means that coastal areas would definitely be uninhabitable, and that is something we don't want to happen. But for that not to happen, then we need to rapidly decelerate how we are consuming and how we are using these fossil fuels and how we are basically abusing the environment.
Well, Mr. Ohanyere, thank you very much for your time and your expertise on this conversation. Ifeanyi Ohanyere is a climate change educator, and he joined the News Extra today. He joined us on News Extra today to talk about the effects of climate change as witnessed on the weather patterns in Nigeria and the rest of the world. Remember that the month of March saw record heat waves sweep across Nigeria, and we do hope that you've learned a thing or two and are making those changes to your lifestyle so that we can together slow down and perhaps hopefully halt the march of climate change. That's News Extra this week on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. My name is Stephen Imediegu.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.